Hi there and welcome to a new episode of Impact Talks. Today we have an interesting guest with us, Thomas Udesen, Chief Procurement Officer at ʻbaɪ.ər, as well as the co-founder of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. Thomas, really excited to have you on. It's been a while since we last talked. Introduce yourself to the guests and what do you do?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. I've seen what you and your team has been able to achieve over the last many months, and I'm super impressed by the activities, but also the reach that you've had. So well done and congratulations. So what do I do? I'm Thomas. I live in Germany. I'm, as you said, the CPO of ʻbaɪ.ər. So that means I'm leading a procurement organization for a large multinational company. I'm also the co-founder of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. So with that, I'm trying to make sure that every procurement professional out there in the world, and we believe there's around 1 million of us, that they are aware of what we are trying to do, of raising the profile, making sure that every procurement person makes better decisions. I'm also a father, so I have and a husband, so I have my family. I'm sitting in my house here in Germany right now. Kids are coming home from school very soon, I hope. So let's see if they are following my request not to enter the room, but we'll see. And you know, a son and a brother, so that's me.
Maybe super off topic, but I remember you were telling me about your vacation, which I think is super interesting. Can you maybe explain what you were doing?
Yeah, so I went actually because of COVID. Obviously, there's restrictions in what you can do. We had planned to be in Tokyo for the Olympics and had tickets to the track and field. Very difficult to get, and we looked forward to that.
How did you get those tickets?
So my wife is Japanese, and her sister was very fortunate to be first in line, and we managed to get some of those. As it has turned out, you know, we couldn't go there, so we have to see maybe for next year if we can go or not. So we went to Plan B. Plan B was to have a holiday in Denmark. So I'm Danish, and with that I could enjoy my home country. 1 week at the beach, where it was my ambition that every morning we would have a early morning swim, me and the family. And I was successful in achieving that ambition exactly one day, because day 2 I was on my own. And then the second week we went sailing, so me and the family rented a little boat and was sailing around the Danish islands.
How long did you guys sail?
Just a week.
And so do you bring your dog with you then, or how does that work?
Yes, because you know I have a dog. I have a golden doodle. So Coco, she was there for the first time. She's a young dog. And that went really well until the wind was too excessive, really, for most of the family, including the dog. So we had some unfortunate consequences as the waves were a bit too big for...
So how old is your dog, right? I just got myself, I just told you, a small toy poodle. But how old is it, and how did you deal with, obviously, first time boat and it's rocking? Do you have medicine for the dog, or how?
No. And we didn't want to fill her stomach because we anticipated it could be complicated. So she, I guess, went through it as good as you can. And she was with my wife. She was also not feeling particularly well, so they were suffering together. But other than that, it really worked perfectly fine. She has a swim vest, so we have a safety vest for her, and nothing happened, so she didn't fall in the water.
Nice. But, sounds like a good vacation.
Yeah, it was.
But I definitely wanted to have that, because I can imagine a lot of people now thinking, what are the best vacations they can do? And I can imagine that could be a great vacation to experience, especially with the dog, you're limited. But no, so back to the actual topic. Maybe explain a little bit first, what does ʻbaɪ.ər do? Because I know for myself as well, everybody kind of has heard of ʻbaɪ.ər but doesn't know what they do. So can you maybe explain for the viewers what ʻbaɪ.ər does, what your role is within ʻbaɪ.ər, and then how you ended up going into this co-founding of this other organization?
Yeah. Well, I think ɓaɪ.ær has a very long history. It's 155 years old. Has with that, of course, also transformed itself multiple times. And also, I've been part of the organization the last 7 years, and there has been very significant changes. First of all, we used to have a plastics business that produced polycarbonate, polyurethane, so foam and the plastic that you would typically see in your cars. That was divested, and a new company was created called Covestro. So it was a ɓaɪ.ær legacy, but it's no longer there. And it's only a few weeks ago that our animal health business, and you would be happy to hear that, so it's a business that makes sure that your pet, your little dog, your new dog is also safe and sound. That is a business that we have also divested to a company called Elanco. And that leaves the core of ɓaɪ.ær, which is a life science company. It is about human health and nutrition. And the vision that we have is health for all and hunger for none. So, how do you do that? You do that by obviously having medicine that is helping people in need. So we have certain therapeutical areas where we are world leaders. One is the hemophilia, some is oncology, others are linked to cancer, which is one area. And then we have the crop science, so agro-business, which is partly the herbicide, the fungicide, insecticide, but also the seeds business and the vegetable seeds business. And that is the food business and the health business. To complement that, we have self-health business over the counter. So it's medicine which does not require a prescription, so it's non-prescription drugs. Along the big brands like the aspirins for headaches, the ɓeɪ.ər for your skin diseases. It's once a day vitamin, ɓaɪ.ər, etc. So that's what it is. It's German based. It's been around for 150 years, but it's really around health and nutrition.
And ɓaɪ.ær is active worldwide, right?
Yeah, so actually the majority of our activities are outside of Germany, but as so many other multinationals, you have a heritage, and of course we have that. We have many functions, activities in Germany, but we are really distributed globally. Same with manufacturing, supply chains, offices, 110,000 people around the world.
Wow.
So it's quite sizable. Yeah.
How does your role go into that? For the longest time, I remember when I started my business now 6 years ago, I really didn't know what a procurement officer was doing until we got one of our largest clients, I remember, and the procurement officer stopped one of the interactions, and we had to go all over back to the negotiation table. So now I kind of have an idea what a procurement officer does, but for the listeners, can you maybe explain your role from a basic understanding, what you do, what your daily activities are kind of like?
Yeah. Well, for running such a large, complex structure and system, my team, which is distributed around the world, makes sure that we, at the end of the day, can transact everything we buy, making sure we get the best value, making sure that we do it in a compliant way, making sure that we are also mindful of the sustainability dimension. So, what impact can we have on society? So what does such a big machine look like? So for our machine, we have a spend of around 24 billion euro, which is 2 billion per month, which is 500 million per week, which is around 100 million per day. And to do that, we have tens and tens and tens of thousands of suppliers and partners around the world. And we conduct millions and millions and millions of transactions. So when you met a procurement person, it was probably because the way that you had been introduced in the first place was outside of the given protocols. And the procurement team was asking you to get back in line and make sure that you have the prerequisites in place. Is there a good contract? Is it the right framing? Have you been screened from your practices? Because what we see increasingly so is that the expectations on companies around their practices with third parties is dramatically increasing. We have to make sure that we are not negotiating, dealing with any company that has bad practices. Checks are being made around anti-corruption. Are you who you say you are? Do you make sure that in your own supply chains you don't have children? Are you a carbon criminal, or are you on the good side? And that's actually what we do. So making sure that both the regulatory requirements, and the legal requirements, as well as the commercial terms are put in place.
Is there a reason, because you kept mentioning sustainability? I know we have quite a lot of corporates as clients, and I know that not everybody checks that. So is that specifically to your team and what you do, and how come? Or is that something that all over the board everybody's doing?
Well, what is happening now is that several governments are making it mandatory. So in UK you have the Modern Slavery Act. In Switzerland they're going through those proceedings right now. Same in Germany, EU, and most corporations have signed up for some good principles around practices linked with the United Nations Global Compact. And if you read the United Nations Global Compact, it says things that your parents would have taught you. Be nice and do things, and don't get involved in sort of abusive behavior anywhere. So it's really good values, and everybody should do that. Now, reality is that some people are much more advanced and have been taking this topic seriously for a much longer period than others. So I have the benefit of working for a company that has been taking this very seriously for a long time. So as an example, it's almost 10 years ago, so 9 years ago, ɓeɪ.ær sat down together with 5 other chemical companies and said, we recognize that there is a need for us to be much more responsible and make sure that our supply chains are equally responsible, that those values have been deployed into the supply chain. And instead of all of us doing it slightly different, which would drive the supply chain crazy because we would all come with different requests, let's collaborate on sustainability rather than compete. And that philosophy was then made as part of an entity, an organization called Together for Sustainability, where since then, in the last 9 years, we have grown from 6 members. We are now 26 members. We are global. The spend under control by these 26 companies is, I think, 350 billion. So it's very, very sizable. Tens of thousands of assessments, audits, which we are sharing with each other in a antitrust compliant framework. Because even though we're collaborating on our supply chain, we are not allowed to disclose who is actually dealing with whom. So there is a black box that is Together for Sustainability. So, with that, we've done this for 10 years almost, and even before that. So we're quite advanced. Others are in the beginning, and others, as you say, are probably not doing what they're supposed to be doing just yet. And that's maybe one of the reasons why governments are now trying to mandate also that there's a bigger role for corporations to also ensure that the supply chains are both economically viable, but also socially and environmentally viable.
From my point of view, I want to ask a specific question, because you've been mentioning 2 things. Obviously, your role as a procurement officer, looking at all these metrics, whether a company fits, but on the other side, also making sure that there's more sustainability in the supply chain. From my end, I've always noticed that startups, beginning company, have a lot to bring towards sustainability, almost exponential betterment there. But it doesn't really go well when a startup applies to work with a corporate, and usually the procurement officer kind of gets in the way. So I guess what I wanted to know, and that was an important question I wanted to ask, is what how do you collaborate with starting companies? It doesn't have to be specifically startups, just like new companies that want to work with you, can contribute something. Is it like a wall that they cannot penetrate, or did you guys have some type of opening? Yeah, how does that work for smaller companies?
So I think it's a typical challenge that you have a startup which is full of great ideas and ambitions and still relatively immature in its processes. It's a dream, it's a technology, but it's not a sort of fully fledged organization just yet. And that little jewel diamond, rough diamond, meets this highly polished industrial, well-oiled machine. And there is, of course, an inherent conflict. And many organizations, also larger organizations, recognize that there is a risk of us almost killing the flame before you even get started by excessive procedures. So typically, there is some leeway that is being offered also to startups, and that they are being supported in their onboarding into a more structured relationship. And it can happen in different ways. So in ʻbaɪ.ər, for example, we've had a series of incubators in technology. So we have a program called Grants for Apps, where also technology companies are invited to provide ideas that is then supported with an infrastructure. Similar to where procurement has also been reaching out to partners, innovative players, is through a innovation platform we have called Thrive, where we've also been putting out business challenges, unmet needs, where we say, this is something we are working on. We invite you to come with solutions, and we want to find ways of partnering moving forward. And when you do that, of course, you have an infrastructure that you can also relate to. That idea is not, let's say, unique to ʻbaɪ.ər. You start seeing that becoming much more common practice. So I think there is hope also for the startup scene that the big corporations actually get it. So I think that's good. I think it's also fair to say that most of the big corporations also recognize that the real fuel for innovation often start with the startup scene. I mean, you come with great ideas. You are not as fixed in your way of thinking, which is a dilemma with large complex structures, because you need to think in a certain way to make it all work. So we want to partner. We want to find out where we causing pain, and we want to find ways of minimizing that. It doesn't change that there are certain mandatory checks and balances that needs to be made, but we try to be pragmatic.
Some things you mentioned was incubators and stuff like that. I've noticed a lot of corporates, especially in the airline industry, doing something like that. But what about potential smaller companies, startups, tech-related or not, that can bring some value and want to maybe collaborate in a different way? I've noticed a lot of corporates introducing innovation managers now, or startup managers. Do you guys have something similar like that, where you guys can experiment with startups and suppliers?
Yeah. So we've actually had that as a corporate program where you have created innovation ambassadors across the whole organization. I don't remember the figure, but it's hundreds, if not thousands, who have been trained in all the innovative methodologies, Scrum Masters, making sure that they understand what is the toolbox of solving issues in new, smarter ways. So that network has been deployed. We have also had several series of the Adobe Kickbox, where the teams, little startups are being formed, and they're being asked to solve challenges in the organization. So we had that in procurement, for example, where we asked people to get invited. We would train them with a startup coach, a real person like you, who have actually had startup experiences. They would be trained, they would have a coach. We would give them a little box, including a credit card of €1,000, where no questions asked. If you want to buy pizza, you can buy your pizza. If you want to have a mock-up of a certain solution model, you can do that. And we ran quite a few series of that, and I'll say that some of the most significant step changes we've had in our procurement team, but I know also in other parts of the organization, came out of those kickboxes. So it's clear, and if you talk about human health, you talk about the future of food supply, it's got to be completely new ways of addressing these challenges. So an innovation network is a key enabler for that.
How big is your team right now?
So for procurement, we are around 1,500 people around the world.
But you're not, you're chief procurement officer of all 1,500, or how does that work?
Well, as I said, you're sitting on a big complex system. So, they report into somebody who report into somebody who report into eventually me. Yes. But what we are trying to do is that we of course want to make sure that organizations are flat. So, in our structures, we have a maximum, I think it's 4, maybe at certain 5 levels, and that's it. So I do know most of them. At least I know their names. I sent them birthday messages every morning, so it's a good way of reminding.
All 1,500?
Yes, but it's not too bad. It's like 5 every day, on average.
Holy moly! That's I remember reading about I don't remember who it was, but it was a Roman general who knew all of his. He had like thousands of soldiers, and he knew all of them by name. It sounds to me exactly like that. Maybe just an interesting question from my end. How do you remember them? Do you have like an Excel sheet, or how does that work?
Well, of course, I get some help with the dates. So I have help with the dates, and then it's sending it out every morning at 9 o'clock. It goes. But I'm not as good as that Roman general you're talking about. I wish. And actually, I'm also doing it to help myself memorize and get into contact with the team, because what tends to happen is there's a little dialogue happening every time, and of course many of our team members have been around for many years, so it's a nice, if I don't meet them through my everyday action, at least I have once a year we get a little chit chat, so that's nice.
We've had a lot of people, also from big organizations and small organizations. I have to say, this is the first time I hear somebody actually talking to 1,500 people, which, congrats, that's amazing. What's your philosophy on leadership? How did you even come to the point where you want to do that? I usually don't hear people wanting to do that even.
If you think of that big system, tens and tens of thousands, millions and millions of transactions, these team members are the ones who make it possible. They are shaking hands. In COVID we're not shaking hands anymore. Virtually shaking hands. We are conducting deals. They are our ambassadors out there in the world, conducting the responsibility in the area they are responsible for, on, I guess, my behalf, but also on behalf of the organization. And with that, they are mission critical. And I think that's really important, and that's also my philosophy. It's really at the front line that the real transaction happens. It's where change is possible. It's where the face of the organization is being represented, and the more I am there to support them, the more I can help with guidance. The stronger the organization will be.
Where did you learn that from? Was there like a mentor who taught you that? Was it a bad experience that you had?
Isn't that common sense?
Well, no, it's not. I've seen many. Mostly, I have to be honest, actually, many people who have a military experience. We've had the chief evangelist of UiPath a couple of episodes ago. He had a military background, and so I noticed when I'm talking with people from military backgrounds, it's very much common sense. But when I talk to people who don't have a military background, it's not very much common sense. So I always ask, like, was there something that you experienced, or was it maybe your parents taught you that you find it critical?
I think there are some. So I don't have a military background. Actually, in Denmark there was no mandatory military, and it was almost like a tombola. You know, you go in and you pick a number out of a hat. And if you have a high number, you are not. And if you have a low number, you are going. So I took 32,032, and anything below 18,000 would go to the military. So I don't have that. But I think, parents, yes. I think the common value around respect, recognizing people for what they do, the importance of every bit in a large machine is clearly values that has been conveyed also by my family, as my parents, as I grew up. I think my experiences also in the forming years as I left Denmark at a young age and I started exploring the world. It allowed
when
me
to. When did you leave? What age?
So I left Denmark at the age of 21. So in '93, you do the math. So it's I've been living outside of my country longer than my life, longer than I've been living inside Denmark. And it took me, that journey took me to places that were unusual. So I spent a couple of years in Belgium and in Antwerp. I also lived in Vlissingen. I was in Holland.
I was born in Antwerp and I live in the Netherlands now.
There you go. So I was in Hoevenen. I was living up in close to Braschraat.
I used to live close there.
There you go. So I was there for a couple of years. This is now in 93 to 95. Then one day the telephone rang and I was sitting in my office with my colleagues and we got a telephone call from Ghana, so from Takoradi, and the message was that they needed extra hands because one of the colleagues had malaria and communication was really difficult, so nobody exactly knew what was going on, so somebody needed to go there quickly. And I was, as it happens, I was volunteered to go as the sort of new kid on the block. So I moved to Ghana. I lived there for a couple of years, and with that had a fantastic experience working with my little team that was there, but also being in a very, very, very remote place without any communication, and learning how to conduct business in a responsible way on your own. So I think that was a big learning curve for me, and maybe some of the respect comes out of that, realizing that you are nothing without your team.
What were you exactly doing in Ghana, and can you tell us more about that experience?
Yeah, so I started working as a management trainee for a Danish company, actually this one, the East Asiatic company. And there was like a multi-divisional organization. I started in the shipping, and then as that was being sold to Maersk Line, big Danish conglomerate in container shipping, I ended up in the timber trade. So the trade of hardwood, typically originating in the rainforest areas, typically being sold to the industrial nations for industrial home usage, windows, doors, floors, etc. And that's what I did. So I was in the jungle, visiting sawmills, identifying logs that were in their yard, trying to think of where could that be converted to. Would that be a good 3x5 going to UK? Would it be a 2x4 going to Belgium? Would that be a lower quality going to? So that's what I learned. I wasn't a forester, so I can't claim that I know much about timber per se, but I knew the commercial background around that. So, and of course I had a team that was running around making sure that what we had bought was also what was being shipped. So quality control, making sure that the shipments were conducted in a way that when you had ships with overcapacity or undercapacity, overbookings, trying to make sure that our cargo was being loaded on the ship, etc. So that was what I did in Ghana, and I think that was probably also where a lot of the inherent interest that I have linked with sustainability got sort of the seeds for that were planted, because I saw in Ghana how many good practices are possible if you want to combine social impact on the ground, economic prosperity, with environmental protection. So it's a very fine balance, and it's hard to get it perfect. But we had the pleasure of working with organizations like the British ODA, who literally had mapped every single tree in the forest and had very clear guidelines of what you could do. So I built a very practical experience of what does sustainable practices look like. And maybe just to fast forward, because then I was there a couple of years, and then I moved to Indonesia. I was then spending altogether 5 years in Indonesia. Some of you may remember when there was a big haze, there was big forest fires. It was pretty grim period. It was also when Suharto was being ousted as a president. There was a new democracy. But in that whole sort of smog that happened, of course, I was also exposed to things that you don't want to do. What is not sustainable practices, and I think that fine line between what's the right way and what's not the right way was something that I saw firsthand, and I have a strong opinion about that.
Yeah, I was in Malaysia once speaking at a conference, and so we went to Kuala Lumpur, and then a couple of days, and then the next day we went to the other side.
Sumatra.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And it was my first time experiencing a forest fire. So I came outside the conference room and I couldn't breathe, and I thought like something bad was happening, and apparently it was normal. Just like the weather was so hot that they have forest fires. But I can imagine that when it's combined with actual bad practices, that it gets even worse. And so yeah, I definitely understand that you had some bad experiences experiencing that. But so it was pretty much the combination of really good examples in Ghana and some bad practices in Indonesia that you started finding the balance then for sustainability, or how?
Yeah, and I think also around that time, what are we now? We are in the late 90s, early 2000. The world mobilized quite a lot of awareness around this as well. So certification schemes were being introduced. Smart Wood was one of the first one. Many of you have probably seen FSC, so the Forest Stewardship Council, of how do you then also make sure that you have regenerative setups, that it's done in a sustainable manner. So that whole beginning, I was experiencing that in the front line. So and of course also saw that it absolutely drove good practices, and that's where I think also the link to procurement was established. I was a trader, so I was buying and selling. But it became very clear that with some good sound principles around not just what you buy, but also how you expect your partners to operate, you can have a big impact. You have by being the buyer, the one who ultimately pays the check, you have a massive power which you can choose to utilize for good or not. And here we certainly, and I benefited from also working for a company that had very responsible practices, that absolutely wanted to see that the supply chain changed its practices.
What did you study to get a job at a company like that?
Well, that was a multinational that had like an internal apprentice management trainee program, and the way I ended up in this organization was also through, I guess, total conviction. So if we go a little bit back in time, I think my father, when he was a young man, was also he was a shipping man. And I remember as a child growing up at the breakfast table, listening to stories from far away. And I think with that, a thought was put in my head that I wanted to, live in the world. I wanted to embrace the diversity that exists on this planet, and I wanted to, get out of Denmark, which is a relatively small country. Wonderful, but I wanted something else. And at that time, there were really two options. There was either the East Asiatic company or Maersk Line, the other big conglomerate. And I, for whatever reason I cannot explain, I put my love towards EAC. And at the age of 14, I remember vividly, I was standing in a wooden telephone booth at a boarding school where I was, and I was putting in the coins. And I called the HR head of that organization and said, I'm Thomas, I'm 14 years old. I'm going to work for you one day. What do you want me to do? And he was accommodating, maybe surprised, and he said, finish your basic commercial degree and give me a call in a couple of years. And that's what I did. So I took a degree in maritime law. I did business studies, which in the end I complemented with a MBA. Then after having been in Indonesia. So
after Indonesia, the MBA. How come you decided to go for the MBA after Indonesia? Because you're already on your career path. What's the reasoning to then pause the career and go for an MBA?
Yeah, so I think that there was a big shift. I experienced that the company, my company that I loved so dearly, was sold to a competitor, and I didn't feel that there was a match between their conviction and their philosophy and my values. So I think here, particularly if you are operating, this close to environmental issues, you are operating in the rainforest, it's important you feel totally convinced that every day you do what is good for the community, for the environment. And I felt that it was not the same. So that was a trigger point where I said I probably need a change. And having lived 5 years in Indonesia, great years, great culture, but you were also being treated as a very privileged person at a very young age. I'm not very old at this stage. I'm still, in the beginning of the 30s, and I would have my staff, and I would have my swimming pool and a pool boy, and it's not the life that I was born into. So I thought it was important to come back to a European setting and get a bit calibrated on what is it that my role is in life, and whilst in certain contexts you will be treated as if you are more important than you really are, I thought it was important to get grounded. So I forgot to mention, but I met my wife, and I mentioned she's Japanese, but we met in Ghana. So of course she was part of this journey. So we moved from our big multi-story house into a micro room at university. So it was a complete flip around, and that was an excellent decision. So I
wait. How what was your wife doing in Ghana? Was she working for the same company?
No, she was working for the Japanese aid organization JICA, which is like US aid or ODA, or each government has their aid programs. She was a teacher in a very, very small vocational school on the top of a mountain in the jungle.
So then how did you meet?
So I met her because there was a German family who was running a sawmill, who was like a proxy mentor or a sponsor for her.
Okay.
So because she was one of the few foreigners in the area, they took a interest in her and her well-being and etc. So I heard one day that a young Japanese girl had arrived at this location in Koko, and that she was quite nice. So I thought I should check it out.
Yeah, that's a good one. But so you then, a couple of years, like 5 years later, was it, after you met her, decide to go to Indonesia, and then you convince her to go with you, or how does that work?
Yeah. So of course then we would go to England. We spent 1 year studying. So I was studying, and she was also doing some courses, not the MBA, but she was with me on the university.
How is the transition from having pretty much everything and the pool boy and the life in Indonesia to a micro room? Obviously,
Wonderful.
it was a choice for you, but how was it psychologically? What was going on? Can you tell me a little bit more about grounding yourself after something like that? And did you have any tough moments?
No, I loved it.
What did you love about it?
What I loved was that I was at the MBA, and of course, as you go through such a program, particularly the one that in Cranfield, where I went, is through a lot of dialogue with your fellow students. And I think it was the first time that I really was intellectually sort of stimulated endlessly. And I found that many of my past practices could have been, done better or differently had I only known a theoretical framework around that. So I could draw so many parallels from the theory of, management and business from what I had done. And often I would have said, gee, it would have been nice if I had just known this 3-4 years ago. So it was a great learning process, and I really enjoyed that. I also met fascinating people from all over the world. So the group that we were part of was stimulating, and I think that's what I liked. The life is a journey, and that was definitely a year that was super stimulating for us culturally, intellectually, for our relationship. It was very good.
Can you share some of the biggest lessons that you learned that you thought, oh, if only I knew that? I can imagine very, necessary for some of the listeners, including me.
Yeah, I think what I took as the most important lesson, though, out of the experience was that a lot of speak makes an MBA or business practices very advanced, and it looks and sounds almost scary, and it can be somewhat intimidating if you are not familiar with it. And my experience coming out of the MBA is that the vast majority is just common sense. So, if you are able to retain a common sense, and if you are able to listen and learn and reflect and improve, you can obtain exactly the same without the certificate. But that confidence of actually even asking sometimes the question, what do you mean, came out of the MBA, because you up until that point I would have been slightly intimidated. If I ask what does it mean, it makes me look a little bit silly. I think with the MBA I realized that it's just common sense, and the best thing you can do is to ask for clarification if you don't understand. I think that was the biggest learning. It took some self-made fear away from how I interacted.
How did you learn that? What happened that it finally clicked?
I don't think there was a particular event, or I can't think of that. I think it was maybe the aggregated that you just realize that it's actually not so different from, again, the basic values, the good practices that you would have picked up through normal life. And I found that, liberating in a way, that you can achieve everything without even some of those books. Because if you listen to life, you can get that. And I think that's what we see, and maybe also in many of the startup scenes, people who are just passionate about something, hardworking, they get the values all right, they know how to conduct themselves. You don't need a fancy certificate to achieve something, and that's what it confirmed to me. But it took that 1 year experience to probably realize that.
Wow. And so after that 1 year experience, I think you went to Johnson&Johnson, right?
Yeah. So it was a bit similar to that first job with East Asiatic. I remember in the first week I went at the MBA, I met a Chinese girl, Jennifer, And she was working for J&J out in Shanghai, and she talked about the organization, how the credo, it's value-based, how people interacted. And I really remember getting the thought, say, wow, I mean, that sounds a little bit like this company. It's American, but it's a values-based organization. And I sort of got myself hooked on the idea that I would join them. So of course, as many other organizations, they would come on the campus, they would have a recruiting event, and I then hooked up with them and also made it be known that I thought it would be a good idea that they hired me, and that was how I saw the future, and that we should do that together. And as part of that whole process, I was lucky, again coincidence, I guess, to talk to the one who was leading their procurement organization in Switzerland, a Belgian national called Hans Milot, and it clicked immediately. So it felt right that this was a place I should go. It was based in Zug in Switzerland, and I almost said yes, and I had no idea where Zug in Switzerland was. I remember we went in and looked in the map, and this is it. But that was also a great decision. I had the benefit for the next 10 years to work as part of a absolutely high-performing team. I had some amazing leaders that taught me a lot of things, and that I could watch in action, learn. As time progressed, I had my own teams. I got areas of responsibility. The topic of sustainability became very real. So you may remember there was a KitKat campaign. This is 2007 or so, around palm oil, that led to a lot of industry coalition, also with NGOs, around the topic of responsible palm oil. So I had a chance to work on that topic with various NGOs and try to come up with a palm oil strategy, which was great.
A couple of questions pop up there. The first question being, you said you've learned a lot through mentors and everything. What were you learning at every stage? What was happening? What stands out the most that you think could be relevant?
So one of the things that come to my mind is the people development as a critical success factor. So if you are an individual, it's critical that you go on this journey of lifelong learning, and that was very much supported as a company overall, but also by the leaders. So as I was at the entry level, I got access to lots of development opportunities, training centers, mentors, challenges on assignment, on the job assignment. So that was almost ingrained in that philosophy. And of course, as you then grew up and got a team, and you got a team of a team, that was reinforced consistently across the organization. And I think that is also, some of the learnings that I carry with me. That again, it's not me who is actually doing that much. It's the aggregated team that is performing. And if they are well supported, well trained, well equipped, then the result will be a good one.
Have you had moments where people don't perform well, and how would you act with them, or how would you solve that?
Yeah, no, well, you have that, of course, in all organizations. It would be J&J, it would have been earlier. It's also here in my current job. You have areas where there's non-performance, and I guess a couple of things I learned. I learned that if you have a person that is not performing in their current role, you have a responsibility as a people leader, and that is to do your very best to help the person succeed. So very formal performance improvement plans where you sit down, if not every second day, weekly, talk about tasks, talk about what has to be delivered, help them to overcome that. And I saw both scenarios. scenario where the person completely recovered and became successful in the current role, and they were on their way. And I saw cases where we had to accept that that person didn't have the qualification, the competencies for that role. And then it's a question: do you find another role, or do you exit? Do you end the employment? And I had all of those scenarios as well. I think what is critical is that at the end of the day, there is an underlying respect for the individual. It's not necessarily the individual's fault that they have ended up in a role that is not fitting their qualifications, and it's certainly not a reason to not show the respect or draw the conclusion that they're not going to be successful somewhere else. So, and even if you then exit, do that in a way that respects the human behind the decision that you have made.
Can you share an example of when you decided to put them in a different role? What were you looking at on your, you were tracking obviously every second day or weekly, you have these performance reviews you were saying. When did you finally decide this isn't working? What were the red signals? And then when did you decide to put them in a different position? And then obviously same question for when did you decide to, then fire somebody? But maybe we can pause that for later because I want to ask a little bit deeper on that. So when do you know about the switching the positions, the role? When is it like enough? Is it like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month?
So this was in Switzerland. So also here there was some element of, labor law. There were some corporate practices. So what we typically operated with was a 10 weeks cycle where you would be able to work very, very deep with that individual on these everyday challenges and tasks that needed to be completed. And I would say we would not draw a conclusion until after those 10 weeks. But at that point, you needed to make a call. Do we put you back in the role? Have you picked up sufficiently that you can be successful and contribute to the team instead of, draining from the team? Or do we need to look at alternatives? And again, we had a couple of cases where the individual would then either be in a new role in the company. Could also be that the chemistry between the manager and the individual wasn't optimal. It could be that the scope was different. We had very commercial roles, we had very operational roles, we had very strategic roles, and of course each of them requires slightly different skill sets. So we could rotate people to do exactly that, but we would do that after the 10 weeks.
So then after the 10 weeks, you sit down with them and you say, based on your skills, we will put you in this different role. And that role is usually something that fits the skills that you've evaluated better, or how?
Yeah, and it would also be a dialogue, because it's not that, the manager is always the all-knowing that, can decide the course of life. It's very unlikely that the individual who has been in a role where they are not performing, that they don't know it themselves. Very unlikely. It's not very likely that they're not looking to work super hard to find a solution. So it's a collaborative effort. And I think, again, if you have the interest of the individual also in mind, and if you have an underlying respect, you can have very constructive dialogues and correct careers into an area where you will be successful.
So it's very much a dialogue, and then usually the person knows what their strengths and weaknesses are and what they could be doing differently in the organization.
That's been my experience. Very few has a complete mental block. They exist. You have also cases where the person has a strong conviction that they are excellent, and you don't.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, that's probably the last scenario where eventually your efforts are simply not working, and the consequence is a dismissal, separation, or whatever is the right word.
How do you know? So obviously 10 weeks, and then you evaluate. What are obviously firing is like the worst. That's the last decision you go, especially with your leadership philosophy. I can see that. So do you really wait 10 weeks? Because my experience has been, if it's a nightmare to work with someone, 10 weeks seems very long to evaluate someone. Also for the person, sometimes it's just not fun to wait for 10 weeks and go through the like clashing or underperforming, which is sometimes also not very healthy for the individual when they want to perform very well. So do you really wait 10 weeks and then evaluate it? And then how do you know, like, it should be? Can you give an example?
Yeah. No, I think that's maybe one of the other areas where the smaller startup scene are a little bit more agile. If you have a small team, 3 people, and the third person drives everybody nuts, and the chemistry isn't there, you are able to make a very quick decision. When you get into a larger corporation, there are policies, there are considerations. You want to make sure that you follow a consistent philosophy, and you want to make sure you don't have exceptions, which at the end of the day can be used also by others to change the underlying policy framework. So, in J&J at that time, I don't know now, but that was a formalistic 10 weeks program. And that's what you did. Now, was that painful at times, and was it tempting to say, I'd rather do it in 2 weeks and then, get on with it? Absolutely tempting. But I had examples where I had almost, dismissed the person that it would be possible, and there was a turnaround. And, that shows that these policies have a good reason, and that the human potential often is, more than you think at that moment. So I think it's okay. I think, again, you also have a responsibility as a company, you have a responsibility as a manager to help the individual be successful. If you can't invest 10 weeks, you shouldn't have hired the person in the first place. It was probably your own decision to hire the person, right?
Yeah, I like that. I like that 10 weeks, and also the fact that you shared the human potential. So then let's go into when do you fire? Like, how do you know?
Well, after those 10 weeks, I think the tell signs are, is there any recognition with the colleague that that there's an issue and that they need to change their behavior. And as I said, there are people who don't get that. So, you can have the conversation multiple times. You can bring in your partners, your HR. You can have a 360 feedback session. If it all sort of blocks and the person has a mental block, you as a manager are not able to penetrate. You may need different type of help, which as a manager and as an employer, you cannot give. And that's where you then need to draw the conclusion. Is that person a liability to the team, to the organization? Is there any hope of recovery? If the answer is no hope and it's a liability, you need to go to that highly uncomfortable position where you need to let people go. And this is never, it's horrible to do. Because you are recognizing again that you are having a big negative impact on the individual. So it's how you do it again, that you have the person in respect. And I've seen multiple cases where the individual that I had to let go, as part of our exit conversation, we explored, are there different settings where they are likely to be successful. And they would pursue that, and they would, pop up later, 5 years later, in super large, successful roles, smiling in a way, saying thank you. It was almost the best thing that happened to me was that you let me go, because I was not in an area where I could grow my potential. So that helps also when you have to do that. That if there are many examples where a new setting, a new beginning, is a catalyst for something great.
Yeah, that's it's very nice to hear, also coming from your experience. back to the question I didn't ask before, which is a little bit off topic as well. So you were going through Ghana, Indonesia, England, and then in the story, you're now in Switzerland. So we're talking now, you met your wife about 5-10 years ago in the story, and she goes from Ghana to Indonesia to England in a small apartment to some city in Zurich, in Switzerland. How did you convince your wife to do that? How were those conversations?
Well, we after Ghana, she was actually 2 years in England, so she took her masters in England, and we had, I was in Indonesia, so we had this long distance relationship. I think that showed, of course, that it was the right thing, and thankfully she's here still with me. So I think that was the right decision, and I think in many ways we share many perspectives on life. She took a master's in gender studies of how do you also enable girls or women in particularly developing countries access to equal opportunities. That in some places it's as basic as who picks up the water, who gets access to funding, who get microcredits. All those type of topics is what's really in her passion, and that actually aligns pretty well with my idea that also business and corporations is a source for good, and that a lot of what we are trying to achieve is fully aligned, and we don't need to pull in different directions. We can actually pull in the same direction. So it wasn't so difficult. Also being a Japanese that left Japan, a young girl. She was also in her early 20s when she went on a plane 2 years to Ghana without a return ticket. It's also, I guess, shows the character of my wife.
Yeah, so it was a bit easier conversation. So where are you guys based now? In Germany, right?
In Germany, yeah.
And so after Johnson&Johnson, when did you start deciding I need to move on? Because it sounds to me like a value-based organization. Obviously, I know Johnson&Johnson from one of my first shampoos that my parents used on me, the only one I liked.
Yeah, and you'll be happy to hear that it's probably the best raw materials that you can possibly imagine. The fragrance is exactly the same as when you were a baby. The packaging is done in such a lightweight manner, and the ingredients are also low impact. So keep buying the baby shampoo. Your hair looks excellent.
I definitely, if I have children, will be buying Johnson&Johnson, but the reason being that it was the only shampoo that didn't hurt my eyes when I was getting baths. It's the only thing I remember.
No more tears. That was it. Yeah. So what happened? As all major corporations, they go through cycles, and J&J in 2002, 2003 was looking at how do they structure the organization overall, how do they structure the supply chains, and they're always, you can go that way, but there was a period where it wasn't very clear. And of course, as such a period where it's not clear you're going to go that way, employees are vulnerable for headhunters to approach. And up until that point, I had been very good at dismissing approaches from headhunters because I was super happy. But when you don't really know, you at least maybe listen. And that's what happened. I was contacted by a headhunter, and the option of ʻbaɪ.ər was being introduced, and there was a couple of things that made the company really and the opportunity super interesting. One was that it was closer to my parents, so of course they're getting older and would like to enjoy. In the meantime, we have 2 kids, so they want to see their grandchildren. I want them to be with their grandchildren, closer to the family. So Düsseldorf, where we moved, is halfway between Switzerland and where my parents are. Then, my wife being Japanese, Düsseldorf is the European hub of Japanese culture in Europe. So
really?
there's 5,000 Japanese living in Düsseldorf. So you have the You have the restaurants, you've got your hotels, you've got the supermarkets, you've got school. So we decided that it would be a chance also for the kids to get much more familiar with their Japanese heritage by getting involved in certain, weekend schooling activities. And then, the company seemed like a really amazing equivalent, a German variant of a J&J or a East Asiatic company. Very values-based, very long history, multi-divisional, global reach, endless opportunities. So I was curious, and I went for interviews, and I had again the benefit of meeting some truly amazing leaders. I ended up in the material science division, so the plastics I talked about in the very beginning. The CEO was a gentleman called Patrick Thomas. I met the CEO of ʻbaɪ.ər, a gentleman called Marijn Dekkers. I met a leader, Tony van Osselaar. I met some amazing human beings that convinced me that it was, although painful to leave J&J, it was the right step for my family and for me. So we made that decision. And after 10 years with J&J, with many tears, I had my round and said goodbye and moved here. And that's 7 years ago now.
How big was your team at J&J when you left?
I think it was, that's a good question, maybe 50 or 60 or so.
Wow. And so you went from that to your position within ʻbaɪ.ər. How did those first days, did you get your team right away? Was there an onboarding? How was the first couple of weeks, days?
Yeah, so we've been busy in ʻbaɪ.ər the last 7 years. So the first job is not the job that I'm sitting on today, and being in that position. I was leading the procurement team in a division. And at the time we had a different setup where all the divisions had their own organization, and we had a council of the leaders who would then decide on topics that were relevant for everybody, things like processes, system, talent development, sustainability. So that was the infrastructure. And shortly after that, it was decided then that the plastics material science division would be sold off. So I had to prepare for my team to be starting on their own feet. So an IPO, we set that up, and I was both in the IPO and outside of the IPO. So I had to do that for a couple of for some months. So then the company became a life science focused organization. And that's what we did for a while. Then we also restructured once again, such that we had one integrated procurement function. So that's now in 2016, and that's the first time that we had a setup similar to what I have now. But since then we have acquired the American company Monsanto. We have handed over the animal health business. We have divested some other assets. So it's been a very, very dynamic period, so that today it's a pure health and nutrition company.
So then your start within ʻbaɪ.ər was very much kind of procurement, but then it evolved throughout the evolution of what was happening within ʻbaɪ.ər to eventually.
It's been procurement all along. It's just that the opportunity raised itself that we could harmonize in a more integrated manner, that we could invest into the infrastructure. Again, think about this system, tens and tens of thousands of suppliers, millions and millions of transactions. It's nice if you have a good setup that is relatively simple and digitally enabled. And that's what we've been doing. We've been introducing a lot of technology, rewriting the rules, simplifying how we are doing things, and that's a journey we are still on. So we are by no means where we have to be yet. The journey continues, but that's what has been sort of keeping the team and me busy for all those years.
You're coming from, obviously that's the main trend over your story and your life, a very value-based life, not only job of course, And then I can feel, I resonate very much with that, with when I see a value-based company. Obviously I have my own company, so then we try to become a supplier with them. And I remember coming to the Netherlands the first time and meeting a corporate company here, and just feeling exactly the same thing that you felt with Johnson&Johnson and ʻbaɪ.ər and everybody. But why do you think it attracts you so much? Why is this value thing so important? I mean, you kind of mentioned your dad was telling you stories, but what you said is he was telling you stories about, exploring the world, which explains Ghana and Indonesia and stuff like that. But why are you so value-based? What is it that, have you ever explored that or analyzed that?
Well, I think every person is, I guess, born into the universe with a certain potential, and it's up to each of us to decide: are we gonna use that potential to have a positive impact or not? Is it gonna be self-serving, or is it gonna serve the community at large? And I think as my life and as my experiences happened, I also realized that the biggest positive impact that I can have on the planet and humanity is by using the power of my position to also direct a change for a positive impact, and that reflects itself into how we run procurement in ʻbaɪ.ər, how we were doing it, and they still do it in J&J. But also the pledge, where we are trying to invite others who are maybe not benefiting from working for a great company like me, that they have a chance to declare that there are certain sustainable, responsible principles that they believe in and that they want to stand up for, and that's my platform. I can do that. I have the network. I have lots of friends and colleagues and from the industry in procurement roles, leaders who also share that, and that's what we're doing together. We are marching to have a positive impact, and I guess it's, at the end of the day, it's linked with legacy. It's what is it that how did you use your talent? Did you waste them for the benefit of the wrong thing, or were you applying them for something a bit more meaningful?
Yeah, so pretty much, if you are in that position, so why not?
Why not? I mean, that would be, it's common sense, right?
Yeah, I like that. We have a segment which leads really well into that, because it's called Impact Talks. Our segment's called Impact Stories. We ask it every episode. And the question is then, what is the project you worked on that had the biggest impact? Especially as you were talking, so many times where you were able to do impact, but what is the project where you really felt the largest impact that you had?
So I think it is a project that is work in progress, and I would say it is the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. And if you don't know about it, you can go to www.SPP.earth or check it out on LinkedIn. And there you can see that I have co-founded this grassroots pro bono movement together with Bertrand Concoré, who is my equivalent at Henkel. We believe that there are lots of people out there who has an inherent passion to do good and use the power that you have as a procurement professional for something better, that you make better decisions, that when you make a deal that you are considering the economic consequences, but also the social and environmental. So we can have a positive impact on inequality, we can have a positive impact on the environment, and that's what we want to do. And we believe that there's around 1 million procurement professionals in the world. And our ambition is to have every single one of them, so 1 million procurement professionals who sign up for this pledge. And the pledge is back to what we talked about earlier. It is good principles that your parents, would have taught you if you are lucky. And that is about, do no harm, make sure you're doing it in a responsible way. That's what we are working on now.
A couple of questions. So first, how many do you guys have already that signed up?
So we are, right now, we are 1,700 ambassadors, so literally from all corners of the world, the smallest islands, the tallest mountains. We have people in Nepal, from Fiji, and let me just put that back in. And that's 1,700 seniority. We have students, we have professors, we have heads of functions, we have practitioners. So across all industries. But with 1 million as being the target, it takes some quick math, but it means that we are still 998,300 short.
Yeah.
So that's what we are. That's why I say it's work in progress. We still have to recruit 998,300.
How did you recruit the 1,700, and what is your strategy to recruit the rest?
Okay, so we started, I guess, not imagining that we would even reach the 1,700. We were triggered by the climate strike, which I think takes place in October 17th or so last year. And I remember I saw a video of David Attenborough, Jane Goodall. There were Greta Thunberg. There were some people who, in a World Economic Forum video, said, how can it be that we are such a clever species and we have everything available, and yet we are now in the process of damaging our own home? Good question, right? So I put that on LinkedIn. I said, we as procurement, we gotta do something, because we are really the deal makers. Behind every seller sits a buyer. So the whole world economy is looking at a procurement person at some point. I mean, you said that yourself. So we should really activate this community, and it became really viral. Not like you viral, but like me viral. Smaller numbers, but lots of people who said this is a great idea. Let's do something. So we reached out to a lot of opinion makers, so professors from universities. We talked to the multipliers, the people who are in the industry, the reporters, practitioners, and we said, we should do something. And the 5 principles behind the pledge were then drafted. A very inclusive process where we say, it's created by many and it's intended for all. But the baseline for the pledge is the United Nations Global Compact principles. And we were just saying, we start with ourselves. We have to listen. You have to be committed to doing even small steps, because there's an African proverb that says even the long march starts with one small step, and that was really the underlying philosophy. And if you look at that 1 million people, they are literally sitting everywhere. They are in factories, they are in ships, they are in offices, they are in labs. If we can activate them to do good, then that's really important. And what we have learned is that the passion is quite inherent. So again, people, word of mouth. If we have an ambassador, they invite more ambassadors, and the snowball increases like that. And that's our approach: create a community where, particularly the practitioners, that they have access to practical tools, that they can start the journey. Many of them are a bit overwhelmed because it's so big. And we want to show that other people had the same problem, and you are not alone, and this is what they did. And with that, every single step will have an impact. So that's one area. And then, of course, we work on leaders across companies and industries to also invite them to invite their teams and ignite the potential that exists. And we haven't thought the strategy much further than that. We will just go every day. More and more are coming, and hopefully, before I pass, we'll be at 1 million. That would be nice.
What do you think your strategy is? Is just connecting with people while networking and then inviting them, or what is it for now?
And making the content relevant. Create a tribe, a community where people feel free to go and share questions and get access from other practitioners just like themselves to give them answers. So a very practical community. We have communication sessions. We put out challenges. So last Tuesday we had a global webcast where we were looking at the do's and don'ts of sustainable procurement. What are the practices? What works? What doesn't work? Next one will be around how do you engage with your suppliers. The first one was around why is it even relevant? What's sustainability and procurement got to do with each other? So very practical pieces of information, and that's what we believe it gives people the encouragement, the tools that equips them to also start that long journey, that long march. And at the end of the day, it's all about the sustainable development goals and making sure that we contribute, that the UN ambitions, the world ambitions, your ambition, my ambition, is met by 2030. So that's what it is. We have 10 years of heavy lifting, and we want everybody to do their part.
Have you ever tried to do like an event or like an award ceremony or give some type of badge for the people who are achieving something within the ambassador circle that you have already?
Not yet, but I like the idea. Remember, we are not even 1 year old. We haven't had our first birthday, so we're still growing. Crawling and as you can imagine, we all have day jobs. So it's totally pro bono. I think you're a bit the same, right? So you have to squeeze it in between everything else that is going on. So
startup funding events started very similar. I remember we also had this drive to do something more, and it was very focused locally because we were quite small as a team back then. I mean, we're still pretty small, but we started with a small event. A lot of people who just supported us. We got like 150 something people, which was super surprising. We didn't expect it. We thought maybe like 50 people would show up in the best case scenario. And then I remember it went just really crazy, really fast. Amsterdam Capital Week called us, and then suddenly we were at Slush in Scandinavia.
Finland.
And then I remember our first year anniversary, we did our big events. That was like the big one that you see on our website. So events is definitely like a possibility. I can imagine if you have an award ceremony that can maybe give some more like stimulus so that people actually want to do more or something.
I will take that up, and I think we will have a conversation on the side on how can we learn from you, because I think that is true. I mean, at the end of the day, people are proud to show their progress, what they have done. And I think everybody is a bit of a hero. It doesn't matter whether it's a big project or a small project. It's the intent behind the action that really matters. So lots of recognition possible.
I think what's always important about startup funding event for us was because obviously we have our actual company, and then startup funding event was everybody volunteered in it, everybody from our team as well. So it's pretty much like in the evenings, a couple of hours. I think like an hour a day or something like that. Sometimes we could get together on a Saturday, but I remember just how the reason it grew is because of the need. And it sounds to me like there's such a big need for what you are doing, and everybody wants to do it, but nobody has ever facilitated it. Just like with us, our focus was on startups who could scale our impact and help positively for a human life and make that hopefully thousands of human lives. But we found also that some of these social startups were just really bad at branding, at business, and we found that we had something that could help them get to that level where they could actually start impacting thousands of people. And so the reason it started scaling so fast is because our structure that we had internally within the company and the resources and the network and the people, it didn't naturally put blockades for the message that we were spreading. Which is why I'm saying, like, if you have the resources, like a small award ceremony can start unleashing some of these walls that are blocking, your growth towards 1 million or something like that.
Yeah. No, we need some help, so I will reach out to you.
No worries. We'll talk about it later. You have my WhatsApp. But no, it sounds super interesting. I definitely get it. The one question I definitely still wanted to ask is, you do have like this day job with, thousands of people where you're obviously every day talking about with their birthdays, and yet you then sent that message out and you have a co-founder, you said. What was that conversation like to start this, to take the extra hours, do this initiative? Were you sitting in a bar? Was this like, oh, I know you for 6 months. Oh, I just met you. We have on social media. And we're like, what was the history behind that of getting this co-founder and doing this?
So with my day job, I had the hat as being the CPO of ʻbaɪ.ər. But I mentioned that we have also participated in the industry association, the Together for Sustainability, which is where we have 26 companies marching together, trying to harmonize and have a big impact. And my partner in crime is Bertrand, my co-founder. He's the president of TFS. So of course, we have regular connections around this topic of sustainability anyhow. And he's a great guy. So we talk ever so often, and literally after that viral reaction from the world saying we should do something, a Saturday morning we talked to each other. I called him up and I said, how can we do this? Is this something we can do together? And Bertrand is a very visionary person also, and I think here our skills are complementing each other really well. So it felt so aligned with my day job, with what we are trying to do as a broader chemical industry, that we said, let's try it. And of course, we had no idea that it would have the traction that it has had. And like all other startups, we crawl and then it doesn't work, and we reinvent and we come up and we move forward, and that's a bit where we are. So we are in that sense also a startup.
Yeah. It kind of really goes well into another segment that we have in our show, Impact Talks. And this one is the crash and burn segment. So what is the biggest failures that you didn't expect throughout maybe your entire career, or obviously this 1 year experience that you've had, because you have a unique perspective coming from so much experience starting this initiative movement almost. So throughout the entire career, you can choose what are the biggest failures you didn't expect, and what did you learn from it?
So I think I have actually been fortunate, or maybe not, but so far there hasn't been one failure that stands out. I think there's been smaller ones, I guess, along the way, and you have learned. But there's really nothing that stands out. What I think one of the learnings I've taken with me is, particularly you talked about the performance and low performance, and where I guess my nature is one that I would rather give people the benefit of the doubt and take the 10 weeks. And maybe if there's still hope, I will give it another 10 weeks, etc. And one of the lessons I've had to take in life is that, particularly if you have a person that is leading a team, giving excessive credit and hoping for the best without seeing any noticeable improvement happens at a cost of the team that person has. And there it's your responsibility as the leader for such an individual to really remove them earlier, so that their team gets a supervisor that is more aligned with what we are trying to achieve. And I think that's one of the lessons I took also years back, that I think I was too slow to make the inevitable out of all good reasons at the time, I thought. But the price that was paid, I didn't pay the price myself. The people reporting into that person paid the price, and that's not fair. So that's a big learning.
That's I really love that, because it shows leadership. as in you think you're doing the right thing by helping this person that you are feeling and, you know, talking to, but there are other people who are getting affected because of, you know, incompetence. But so how do you know when those people are getting affected? Obviously, not looking back now at that mistake, but you've learned something. So how do you now spot a bad manager or leader and these people getting affected?
I think it is, it's totally avoidable by you making sure you, in your selection of your team, spend a lot of time in understanding those people, you know, what is it they stand for, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. I mean, everybody has development needs, I have, you have. So it's figuring out how do you complement this composition in your team and leverage that, but that you are not compromising leadership and care for the organization. That's a derailer from a people leader perspective, and I think that's the most important thing, is to make sure that as you're selecting people, that they are amazing leaders that will leave a legacy of other leaders that were inspired by these people. That's most important.
So how do you know, what do you see in them, what do you ask them that shows you that?
I think most people have a track record, and if you work in a larger organization, you see people in different settings. You have a chance to observe, you talk to people, everybody has a equity, a reputation, whether it's from the managers, from the people, from their peers. There is a bit of a 360 going on, and I think it's important to have people who can manage the vertical dimension. Of course, they need to be able to manage their bosses, and they need to manage their people and be an inspirational leader, but they also need to be competent at the more horizontal, which is around your peers, and how do you collaborate with other departments, how do you broker deals, how do you act as a bridge maker. So having people who are both vertical and horizontal, I think is critical, and you form an opinion, particularly in large organizations where you see each other. You have an idea. It's maybe more difficult when you have an external hire, where you don't know the person at all, right? So there you have tools, you can have psychometric tests, you can have centers where they're being observed and different, but you never really know. When you hire from within, you know. Also the things that are not so great, but it's a very conscious decision.
That's very interesting. So when you're hiring internally, it's probably much easier. I didn't think about it that way. But so what you're saying is what very much pops up, which is not happening a lot in a smaller setting like a startup or like a scale-up company. But what you're mentioning is, as you go into corporate, a great leader in a corporate setting would be someone who's almost like a politician, who can manage his boss, his peers, and his employees. And that sounds to me more like a politician, because in a startup setting, you're managing, I don't know, it feels like maybe that's why startup founders have issues working in a corporate setting. Is that possible?
I think so. I think it's the rules are different, and I think a lot of startups are super passionate about a very deep topic, and you are the expert. It's your creation, and you are also very operatively active. It's not going to happen by sitting on PowerPoint and talking on Skype. You have to really work hard. And of course, I've done that as well. And of course, we have thankfully also leaders who are doing that. But as you progress in the organization, your role is just changing. If I start doing people's work, I do more damage than I do good. So my role is to enable the organization, this humongous system, to constantly evolve and improve and get new ideas, grow.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that as we started growing as well, and we had some pretty hefty recruitment seasons, because we recruit in seasons, where like the organization would double suddenly, and it would get so intense on me. because roles are changing and you start noticing that you do more what you said exactly, you do more damage taking something over instead of doing what you should be doing, which is more vision related.
And I think that's typically a big challenge for people who are growing, from entry level and at one point you need to let go. It's not about you. It's not about what you can do. It's about what can you do for the team, or what can you do for a leader who is running a team. And there is, of course, this micromanagement, which can be a real issue as you progress, because if you are micromanaging, nobody really wants to work for you. It's horrible. Have a boss that tells you exactly what to do and how to do it. So, and I think it's true. I think many of the entrepreneurs, people from the startup scene, they would get frustrated because there are questions you have to ask and you have to wait maybe. But if you know how that works, you build resilience and you can see the small changes and then you understand that that's going to have this positive impact and you build patience. I think it's good to have patience. Otherwise, you're right, you would get frustrated.
I think if in the last couple of years we very much focused on corporate work, and the first 2 years were tough for me, and then once you pass those 2 years, deals start to happen, and then you get 3, 4, 5 years, and you start realizing that patience is what gets those deals done with corporates, and you just start noticing how tough it is if you're a really small business with very little funding, because typical deals can start anywhere between 6 and 18 months. Sometimes our negotiations last 2 years before anything gets done. Yeah. So you need a long breath with corporates, and patience is definitely something I learned with that.
And I think again, it's your sales strategy. Are you a hunter or are you a farmer? And I think in many of the large corporate settings, you need a sales approach more like a farmer. You put in the seed, you wait, you nurture it, it comes out. You can't be a hunter. It doesn't work. You don't come in and sell. It's just an illusion.
I have never heard of that analogy, and I really, really like it. That's a good one. Very to the point. We're kind of coming to the end now, and I really want to ask, one of the last segments that we have is called Random Stories. And the question is, what are you currently doing or learning not related to business that gives you energy? So not related to business.
Okay. So, as you would imagine, I have, like everybody else in large organizations, gone through a lot of self-realization and reflection, and what is the bigger why, and how do I get a better person and a better leader and all that. And as part of all these discussions that I've had, it dawned on me that one of the things that I really miss in life was around sailing. So this guy here. So when I was a child, I was sailing. I was doing dinghy sailing, and I was sailing with my families. And I remember I had so many, very nice memories, sitting with the dog, my sister, and what. So I realized I missed that, but I'd just been too busy, and in Africa and Indonesia and what never really worked out. So I decided a couple of years ago that I would activate that again. And I took my day skipper certificate so that I can go out and sail with my family, which is what I did. I took my short range radio certificate, so I can do my Mayday. I hope I never have to do that, but I can operate a boat. And building on that, my dream also I came to remember was that I wanted to cross the Pacific.
The Pacific.
The Pacific Ocean, and
wow.
by coincidence, I met a person that had done a bit of research around, what are the options, and I learned about the Clipper Round the World race, which is a race that has been going on for 30 odd years, where amateurs, a bit like me, have a chance to join a professional crew, a professional skipper, and sail around the world. And I don't have time to sail around the world, but I have committed myself to sail from Latin America to South Africa to Australia. So it gives me the Pacific Ocean as well as the Southern Ocean, which is some of the most amazing large waves that you can possibly imagine. And that's a project that was scheduled for the end of 21, but with Corona, the ships are unfortunately right now, the fleet is quarantined in the Philippines. So, they can't move, and with that, the whole cycle has been delayed by a year. But by the end of 22, you will see me take my sabbatical, and I will be jumping on a boat, sailing the Pacific and the Southern Ocean Sea.
That's so beautiful. So how long does that trip take? How long does the training take? How long does the trip take to do that?
So training are several weeks where you get ready and you learn the ropes and you make sure that you are an asset on the boat and not a liability. But you operate in 4-hour shifts like in the old days with boats like this. And it is probably going to take around 2 months from Latin America, South Africa to Australia. The whole trip around the world, starting in UK and then through Asia, the US West Coast, East Coast, and back, is around, I think it's 9-10 months.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so that's my passion.
One of our we filmed one of our we were filming in San Francisco for one of our clients, and we also got to film the city of Amsterdam has a boat called the Clipper, Stad Amsterdam. I don't know if you know the Clipper. It's a boat that was originally created in the 1900s, I think, or 1800s, and it was completely redone by Randstad. I think they had the blueprints and then they made it very modern. So I'm assuming that the boats that you will be on are like those type of boats from the 1900s?
No, they are absolute racers.
They're racing boats.
Yeah, but they are called Clippers, of course, according to the old Clipper boats, but they are high-tech, super fast.
Oh, so is it like what I see sometimes with Red Bull, of these like super clean, like only sailing thing?
It is like the Volvo around the ocean race. Those big ones. It's a keel boat. It's 70 foot long. There's like 20 people plus on a boat. But I'm still an amateur. I haven't done it yet, so it's still ahead of me. But it was meant to be a way also. So the person who started was Sir Knox Johnston, who was the first person who single-handedly sailed around the world. And his ambition was really to give others who didn't have the time to really become professional trainers that experience that he had. So every year he had, every 2 years they go. He's made that. So several hundreds, if not thousands, have had that experience. And I felt this was a way to make a dream come true.
Maybe a last question, because it was really exciting to talk to you, but which books can you recommend for the listeners to read? What are some of the books that have inspired you the most?
So I actually listen to books on the device all the time. So I have audiobooks. The most recent one I read, actually the one right now is the guy from Mind Valley. So it's called Buddhas and Badasses. That's very good. It's about also how you should run organizations. But I've also recently read the one by Yunus. So the World of 3 Zeros. So 0 poverty, 0 poverty, 0 unemployment, and 0 hunger. And how can social businesses and the construct behind social businesses help entrepreneurs around the world? So he's the Nobel Peace Prize winner from I think 2000, a few years back. Yeah. He was the one who started the Yunus microcredit scheme in Bangladesh. So have very amazing ideas of how to approach business and society, and again have these things go hand in hand. And I think he's right, and I'd like to see that the spirit of entrepreneurship, which your community represent, is one that is further fostered as we progress.
Yeah, I think that's a great time to wrap it up. What I definitely would like to say is invite you, after you've done that trip, to also come on the podcast. I can imagine also for the listeners it'd be amazing to hear how your trip went, and a great way to catch up again. But I think we're with those last words, we can wrap up. Anything you can still share with the listeners? Obviously we went through your entire life, but any last wisdom words?
I think I have probably used your patience out there. So 2 hours I see. So no, I hope it was worth it. And if anybody is curious about different things, want to learn about procurement, who wants to become an ambassador for the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, www.SPP.earth, then you are very, very welcome. And I would love to get to know you. And I want to thank you for, again, having these amazing talks, but also offering the platform to share, one perspective on life. So, thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much. If you like this episode, you can check out our most recent one here. And if you haven't already, make sure you click here to subscribe and see the next one. But if you're interested in more tips and tricks, then make sure to join our Facebook group, where you can find thousands of like-minded people and you get direct access and support to any business question from the entire startup funding event team.